Hello again, friends, and welcome into another edition of Wrestling with Rusty right here on YouTube via StreamYard for February 17th, 2024. This video is about TNA Wrestling, specifically their wrestlers sending a letter of support to the owner in regards to the firing of Scott D'Amore. As you may know, several weeks ago, Scott D'Amore was fired from TNA after getting some good momentum for TNA that has not had any good momentum for the last few months. However, or I should say for the last few years and over the last few months, TNA has had some good momentum. But then they fired Scott D'Amore, and nobody knows really why they fired Scott D'Amore, who was really the face of the company and bringing in good stars and everything. And TNA wrestlers sent a letter of support to Anthem ownership, the parent company of Anthem Sports and Entertainment, the ownership of Anthem Sports and Entertainment, in support of Scott D'Amore maybe trying to come back to TNA. Scott can't do that without the support of Anthem. However, that was the purpose of the letter. And because they're putting this new guy in charge that has been with Anthem, the company, for a number of years and has done a lot of good things, but he don't know anything about wrestling. And so the purpose of the letter was to not only say they support maybe bringing back Scott D'Amore in his previous position as president of TNA, but they also don't think that a new guy that doesn't have any wrestling experience should be running a wrestling company. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I agree with that 100%. The only problem is the people that have the money don't have the wrestling experience, and the people that have the wrestling experience don't have the money. That statement came from Jim Cornette years ago when he talks about when Ted Turner purchased the Jim Crockett Promotions and changed the name from NWA to WCW. Then fast forward a few years, the Jarretts have financial problems in TNA, and they sell out to Dixie Carter and the Carter family. Well, the Carter family didn't have any previous wrestling experience. And then they got rid of mostly everybody else that had wrestling experience in TNA, and TNA went downhill. I'm surprised TNA is still in business. So there are two examples right there. The WCW example, which led to WCW going out of business in 2001, and the TNA example with Dixie Carter and the Carter family getting out of the wrestling business many years ago after spending millions of dollars. I heard they lost $30 million. I don't know if that's true or not, but it was in the millions. So the point being is, if you're going to have a wrestling company, you need to have somebody ahead in the head position of that wrestling company to run wrestling operations, because wrestling is unlike any other sport in that it takes a special person to deal with pro wrestling talents. Not everybody can do that. It's not as easy as it looks, or as you may read or hear about on the internet. So I don't really think the letter is going to do any good. However, that being said, it was nice to see the TNA talent write the letter / email in support of Scott D'Amore. I think eventually Scott D'Amore may end up with TNA, because I think after this experience, even if Scott D'Amore doesn't come back to TNA, Anthem will eventually get tired of losing money and end up maybe selling it to TNA. To Scott D'Amore. I keep saying TNA too much here. Sorry. I'm nervous. This is the first recording on StreamYard instead of recording directly to YouTube. So please forgive me. I'll work the bugs out, I promise. So no matter what wrestling company you're with, but especially TNA, Total Nonstop Action, for those of you that may not know, um, you have to have somebody in charge that understands the wrestling business. I just gave you two examples, the WCW example and the TNA leadership under Dixie Carter example, as to why that should be the case now. So hopefully Scott D'Amore will return to TNA, but I doubt it. But I do think that eventually Scott D'Amore will end up with TNA once Anthem gets tired of losing money. Because some of you may not know that even though Scott D'Amore was a former professional wrestler and a former trainer of professional wrestlers in Canada, and a former pro wrestling manager on camera, that was not Scott D'Amore's main business. Scott D'Amore's family, just like the Jarrett family, made their real money in construction. What type of construction, I do not know. But the point is, the pro wrestling business was not Scott D'Amore's main source of money. Scott D'Amore is a multimillionaire based off of the construction business. And he attempted to buy TNA when he found out that he may be getting dismissed from TNA, but Anthem did not want to sell TNA at this time. But eventually, I think they'll get tired of losing money and they'll sell it to Scott D'Amore or someone else. But I think Scott D'Amore will eventually end up with it if he doesn't start another company on his own, which is also a possibility. But anyway, it was nice to see that the TNA wrestlers and others behind the scenes wrote a letter in support of Scott D'Amore. And they want to see Scott D'Amore coming back. As I said, I don't think that's going to work, but it was still a nice gesture. Hopefully, Anthem will bring back Scott D'Amore in his previous position or sell it to Scott D'Amore or somebody that has wrestling experience so that TNA can stay alive and not go under. I don't think they're going under because they should have went under approximately 20 years ago and they're still alive. But with this new person coming in with no experience, I just gave you two other examples of why a person with no wrestling experience can drive a wrestling company into the ground. Just because you have money to fund, FUND, fund a wrestling company, does not mean that you have the knowledge to run a wrestling company. Not trying to be rude, just trying to be honest. That's going to do it for me, Rusty. I'm out of here. We'll see you next time for another edition of Wrestling with Rusty right here on YouTube. And until we meet again, my friends, God bless. Keep your faith in God. And please remember my friends, Ivan Koloff, Abe Jacobs, and Don Kernodle, all who were professional wrestlers of the past in the NWA, and they have passed on for various reasons. But that's going to do it for me. I'm out of here. We'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. And until we meet again, as the voice of Ring of Honor, Ian Riccaboni would say, happy wrestling, everybody.